Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents. Today I have Tim Chapman, the author of The Blue Silence and A Trace of Gold, and he's here today to talk to us about his books. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, Tracy.
So Tim, you were a forensic scientist. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how much you draw on this to write your books?
Sure. So I worked as a forensic scientist back in the 1990s, both for the Chicago Police Department and the Illinois State Police. Sequentially, one lab was taken over by the other agency. And my main character, Sean McKinney, also a forensic scientist. So I use some of the science that I used back in the 1990s, but my wife still is a forensic scientist working for the Illinois State Police. So I run everything by her to make sure that what I have McKinney doing is up to date, because the field is changing constantly. So she's a good resource. Yeah, it is.
Great. So you also have in your bio that you're a Tai Chi and martial arts instructor. How does this knowledge infuse your writing?
Two ways. I mean, I think that I've made my protagonist also a Tai Chi practitioner, and so he incorporates some of the philosophy of that. But it also helps me write decent fight scenes.
I noticed.
So I teach a self-defense class as well, and I think it was 2 years ago, the guy who owns the school that I teach at, the martial arts school I teach at, and I put together a demo for the Mystery Writers of America. And we had, I think, maybe a dozen chapter members or so come over to his school, his dojang, and we helped them learn some stuff about some of the terminology and demonstrated some techniques for them that they could use when they're writing fight scenes, and tried to help people just basically understand how to write a scene that people will be able to visualize in their mind, rather than just sort of sloughing it off and saying, you know, so-and-so got punched or whatever. So
that's really cool. I took martial arts for a couple of years too. And I know how I try to also visualize what would happen if, you know, instead of just letting him throw punches.
Mm-hmm. That's great. What martial arts did you take?
Bujinkan.
Okay.
It's a little bit more obscure, but it's a Japanese form.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So The Blue Silence opens with a strong sense that something is going very wrong. Tell us about this.
So it starts out with my villain, Raymond Duchamp, who is a sort of a nouveau riche guy who imagines himself to be a criminal mastermind when in fact he's pretty much of a dope. And he's mismanaged his wife's money and needs to do something desperate in order to get more money to maintain his position. And he has a bodyguard / chauffeur named Wayne, who I don't know if you've ever read any Elmore Leonard, but he writes the most hilarious villains. And so Wayne is kind of me channeling Elmore Leonard a little bit. He's a guy who's sort of clueless, doesn't really think of himself as a bad guy, but is certainly willing to participate in the murder and the chicanery that his boss Duchamp will, do in order to save his fortune.
I did really enjoy your sense of humor throughout that, and especially with those two characters. And Wayne the bodyguard just really wanted to be a chef.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then McKinney, the protagonist, he has been fired from his job at the Illinois State Police. I was not. I quit, but he was fired for investigating something which, forensic scientists are not investigators. They're merely there to associate evidence with an event, and then it's up to the detectives and the attorneys to figure out what that means. But he went and investigated on his own anyway. In the previous book, Trace of Gold, so he's dealing with having been fired and having to make a living to put his daughter through college, and also dealing with the breakup of a girlfriend. So he's got some issues as well.
Yeah, but I really liked the attention to detail that you took when McKinney was like researching. He was trying to discover the history of some paper with writing on it, and then the detail that you went into. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So McKinney has a client who bought what is ostensibly a manuscript of a poem written by Edgar Allan Poe, and he wants to find out if it's authentic or a forgery. So, because there are so many examples of Poe's handwriting on the internet, pretty much anybody could copy his handwriting. So that would not be something that McKinney would look at, and he's not experienced in that anyway. So he analyzes the paper and the ink in order to find out whether or not there are materials in the papers and the inks that would not have been used in the 1800s when Poe was writing this poem. So, and when I was an undergrad studying forensic science, I interned at the Internal Revenue Service, and that's where I learned how to do that type of analysis. That's their main thing, is trying to figure out whether or not somebody has accurate documents in their lab. I mean, the chemists that work for the IRS.
Right.
So I was able to use some of that information.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. It was a fun internship.
So what is it you like best about Sean?
Uh, well, he is. I suppose all authors do this. He has some of me in him. So the thing that I like the best about him is that he's aware of his limitations, but he never lets those stop him. He's always putting himself in positions that he's really not prepared to deal with, but because he has a devotion to whatever it is he's doing, he's going to go ahead and do it anyway. In this case, his daughter, whom he's crazy about, gets kidnapped, and he winds up having to put himself into the kidnapper's hideout and deal with them, even though he's not a fighter, he's not a cop, he's not a detective, he's a father.
Right.
So that was his motivation.
Yeah. No, I really like him as a character. He's very steady and and I really enjoyed him, his sense of humor and all of that. So you've also infused your story with great descriptions of Chicago and New Orleans. Have you traveled other places that have become settings in your writing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So also in the story, so I should mention for viewers that there are two distinct storylines in this novel. One of them is set in the present with Sean McKinney and his daughter, and the kidnapping and all of that. And the other one is set in post-Civil War Louisiana, about a young woman who grew up on a sugar plantation, and her trials and tribulations, finding out that, for one thing, her family, whom she adores, were active participants in the slave trade, and she winds up moving to Venice, Italy. And so I used my several visits to Venice to try and, describe those scenes. Although obviously Venice in the late 1800s is certainly different from the way it is today.
Right. And then you mentioned this backstory, and which I thought was really interesting part of this mystery thriller that you've written. And the backstory is connected to the family who's involved in the crimes, the Duchamps, right?
Yes.
But I thought it was really interesting how you went about adding in her diaries. Basically, she's writing about her past for her family, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I really enjoyed doing the historical research. I'm not like a huge fan of historical fiction, but I do enjoy it, and I had a great time doing the research for that, learning about the way Louisiana was back then. In addition to other things that I incorporated about New Orleans in the present, I went on a tour of a sugar plantation and used that as a way to sort of set her background as well. Kind of an interesting side note about that. The tour was led by a docent who let us know that slaves were not mistreated in the South and that everything would have been just fine if the North hadn't, butt their noses in, which was interesting because all of the literature in the plantation and all over their website, they talk about how their slaves at that plantation were beaten and branded when they ran away. And that was one of the things that I used in this young woman's backstory, the fact that her family had branded a runaway slave.
Right.
So during this tour of the plantation, I chose not to refight the Civil War. I just let the black family on the tour know that we knew this guy was full of bullshit.
Good for
Yeah.
you. Good for you. Yeah. Let's not have history repeat itself.
Yeah, no kidding.
So do you have a literary hero or a mentor who has inspired you to write?
I do. So after leaving the crime lab and deciding that I wanted to write, I went back to school and got a master's in creative writing. And in addition to helping me learn the craft, that also enabled me to teach. So I spent the last 10 years, 11 years, something like that, teaching English at Malcolm X College here in Chicago. But during my my master's program at Northwestern, I had an instructor who gave me an independent study project to write a minimum of 5 short stories a week. And then we would meet in a coffee shop at the end of the week, and she would read what I had written and tell me, where I might be on track, what was worth saving, what was, totally worthless and should be tossed out. Her name was Sandy Weisenberg, and that sort of intensive having to get the words on paper thing, I think really helped me a lot. As far as people I've read whom I really admire, I think the 2 best crime stories ever written were written by people who are classified as literary authors. Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates, I absolutely love. And then Flannery O'Connor's story, Good Man Is Hard to Find. I consider those to be the 2 best crime stories I've ever read. So
Very cool.
those are my heroes.
That's great. So it seems like you write a lot about what you know. What do you do when you need to take a break from writing?
I paint. I paint pretty oil pictures, and I play the saxophone. So often while I'm here, I used to write in coffee shops. I love writing in coffee shops. That was one of your questions too, where you like to write. And that was the best for me because I was away from all the distractions I have here at home. Now that I'm writing at home because coffee shops are closed for other than takeout, I write on the back porch because it's sunny and I can look outside. And my wife is constantly feeding birds, so the backyard is full of birds and squirrels and the occasional rat who likes to come in because we live in the city. We
Yeah.
share our space, but because I'm home now, like when I get stuck, I'll just walk away and go upstairs and paint for an hour or play the saxophone for a while, and then I'm a little refreshed and I can come back to it.
Well, that sounds great. Well, Tim, it was really great talking with you today. Readers, you can find more about Tim on Blackbird Writers website and Tim's website as well. And it's been really
So
great talking to you. Oh,
let me give you one more thing.
okay.
So if anybody does like my character Sean McKinney and his daughter Angelina, they started out in short stories in Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine, and and both of those stories are collected in the Kittyland and Other Misfortunes short story collection.
Oh,
So,
great. If you want
so
to, do you want to, can you grab your book and just hold it up really quick?
sure.
Any of them. Yeah.
So yeah, there are 2 Sean McKinney stories in here, as well as a whole slew of other stories. Some of them are crime stories and some of them are not. But McKinney fans, there's 2 more things there.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And we'll see you around the internet.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. This was fun.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.